Hi guys, it's Solids and Bolts back with another movie novel analysis, this time for power scaling. It's gonna be about 13,000 words and take me 70 minutes to read through it. This was actually a paid request by JonTheMaven, which his blog is linked over here, and I'll also link his YouTube channel in the description. I usually don't mess with power scaling, just not super into it, and a lot of people refuse to accept what I say when it doesn't help them win, but I do take paid requests to analyze for it, especially requests as well thought out as this one. You can find my paid request over here on this Ask Me Questions page on my blog, culturalcontext6.wordpress.com. There you go. But I figured I'd make the answers available for everyone, since I think lots of people have the same questions regarding this novel in terms of power scaling, although I don't wish to debate about it. So please take your inquiries over to JonTheMaven and his blog. I'm just posting this so that you guys know it exists and have the information, and can go check out his channel as well. Well, this analysis does primarily use the provided fan translation. I do provide my own translations for certain parts, and comment on parts where the provided fan translation gets a little bit questionable. Now to the requested information. Momoshiki and Kinshiki's entrance. You can find this on page 161 of the novel, which I will have a link to be able to purchase it linked in the description as well. The translation that was given to me was provided by this person who, if I go over here, then you can see they translated the entire light novel on their blog. I think it's called A Little Shipping Never Heard. But anyway, you can see, I think, the whole novel translation from here. But this is where it comes from over here, is this person, Kakatua. The context of the scene is Momoshiki and Kinshiki first appear in the arena, interrupting the Chunin exams. They begin to comment on the people in the arena before Kinshiki engages Sasuke. This is the translation. It was at this moment that the two ogres appeared in the arena. It was plain to everyone's eyes that these two were unknown enemies. The younger ogre had fixed his eyes onto Naruto. Boruto couldn't move. It was because he was feeling something he hadn't experienced yet, the true presence of death. It's this one. The young ogre's eyes were darker than the river Styx. This one holds the strongest and biggest chakra in this seed plot. If we recover it, we should be able to plant the divine tree again. Even though a retranslation wasn't requested here, I did it anyway because the more I read the Japanese and compared it to this translation, the more I became irked to providing my own, which is what happened with other fan translations and Viz as well, which is why I even started translating Boruto in the first place. But I do feel bad for retranslating everything and being like, oh, this doesn't capture the right nuance, and feeling like actually kind of person. But genuinely, there's a lot of things missing here, and I go through and explain them and why I retranslated it and what was different and why, so that you guys can kind of see what's going on a nuance level, as I usually do on this blog. But anyway, yeah, this is my translation of the same paragraph, I guess. Just then, two Oni appeared in the arena. Everyone present could clearly see that these mysterious beings were enemies. Well now, the younger Oni observed Naruto with a keen eye. Boruto was frozen stiff. It was his first time looking doom straight in the face. That's the one. The sapling with the most abundant and powerful chakra within this garden. If we harvest it, we'll be able to plant the divine tree anew. Looking into his eyes were like looking into the dark abyss of the underworld. Explanations as to why I translated it again. Momoshiki has archaic speech. It's kind of from the Heian period in Japan, but it's older Japanese, and you can tell what period things are from when you listen to them anyway. It's kind of not really Shakespearean English, but similar concept where you can hear the difference in the actual spoken words themselves, which is why I tried to translate it a little bit older sounding, but not Shakespearean anyway. I tried my best to reflect that in my translation with the whole, that's the one, the sapling, blah blah blah. I changed ogre to Oni, and I'll get more into that later because it originally says Oni and they're two different things, but that's continuing on. Momoshiki observing Naruto as opposed to just staring at him, hence the keen eye nuance, as well as it gives off a little bit creepy vibes in terms of he was staring down at him kind of haughtily. It's jitto mitsumeteiru. It's the same word that is used a lot for Sarada looking at Boruto, actually, that I analyzed in my other analysis, that you can also check out on my channel. But the setting here is completely different. So instead of observation on like looking at somebody closely and making them feel embarrassed, it's like looking down on them and making them feel like small, pathetic little creatures, I guess, is kind of the nuance. Boruto being paralyzed by fear and not just... It says he can't move, which is the literal, but him being paralyzed by fear is like more of the nuance of that. It feels a lot more intense in Japanese than just, oh, I can't move. It's like he couldn't move a single inch. Like he was trying and he couldn't, and he was just terrified. Because, and then it goes on to say, feeling the presence of death itself for the first time, which reads, again, that's the literal translation, but it reads as a lot more dramatic in Japanese and has a bit more of an I'm going to die nuance. So I changed it to staring doom in the face, or you could also say staring death in the face, but he doesn't die, so I just changed it to doom instead, even though the literal words are sometimes important. In an emotional scene like that, you kind of want to take the emotional nuance instead, because that's what's conveyed when you're reading it in Japanese, is that emotion. That's what they're trying to provoke from you. That's the author's like goal right there. The word death isn't necessarily as important as understanding how fearful Boruto is, which is why I rearranged some things, if that makes sense. The other thing was Kakatua changed the order of the sentences and made a dialogue tag for Momoshiki's eyes, which is a valid decision in a lot of circumstances, and would have been if it was about Momoshiki staring at them, but this one is more about how they are perceiving Momoshiki's eyes as terrifying and dark as the depths of Japanese hell itself, as he looks down on them, which I felt needed to be separated into a different line, just like it is in Japanese. The paragraphs in creative writing usually have a topic and they focus on one thing, and a new paragraph shifts the focus to a different thing. So like when you have dialogue, if a new person starts talking, you make a new paragraph, or if a new topic is brung up, right? So when you're looking at dialogue in Japanese, a lot of times it just puts almost every sentence on a separate line, which I'll get to later as well, but there's no dialogue tags because it should be fairly obvious who is speaking just by the tone itself, because Japanese is so heavy into written, like how you shape the words define someone's speech pattern. Instead of more of English, it's about how they speak, like their tone and their voice, and in Japanese that tone can be conveyed with like the sentence endings they use and the specific words that they choose and all this other kind of stuff, so you can really tell who's talking just from the dialogue alone, which is a little bit more harder to convey in English, which is why they add dialogue tags a lot of times in translations, where they're like, oh, I know who's talking here, but it's not obvious from my translation who's talking here, since that kind of like personality quirk thing couldn't be conveyed as well in English, so you put a dialogue tag, right? But when it's talking about, like, it's very clear from the speech, again, that that's Momoshiki talking, because he's talking about Seedplots and he's talking about like the divine tree, and like the vocab there is very much something that Momoshiki would use, so it's clear that he's the one speaking. And then the line about his eyes is, since it's coming from another observational perspective and not from him looking down on them, because if it was about him still, it would fit in the same topic of that like sentence paragraph thing where he has this dialogue and he's looking down at them. But since it's about them looking up at him and perceiving his eyes as terrifying and like perceiving this creature as terrifying, I felt like it should go on a different line because it's a new topic, if that makes sense. There's some creative writing stuff for you there. And then Momoshiki talking about Seedplots was confusing, and I'll explain that more later, because this translator took things really literally a lot of times, and I think that can be good, but I think there's times where you need to pick and choose, and also times where you need to explain what the literal was behind that, which is kind of what I do throughout this post. So this is more of a translation comparison post as well, instead of just me analyzing the Japanese. I kept the same garden and trees nuance and rearranged it with a little bit more elaboration so it flows and makes more sense as to what he's actually talking about by Seedplot, which I'll go into more later. So now on to the questions that he asked me. Number 1. What term is used for ogre? Oni, or something that implies a Western-style ogre or demon? The term used for ogre in this translation is Oni, specifically this kanji right here, Oni. And Oni is a Japanese yokai, and there's a lot to get into with that. I linked the Japanese wiki page, so I'm going to put it over here for you. So you can look at it, and I will do this as well. There you go. Wow, look at this beautiful formatting. But anyway, you can see you can read this whole page. It'll eventually translate the whole thing if you have some sort of translation thing. And you can click on any of these links in here as well and check it out. It's a really cool Wikipedia page. It teaches you a lot, and I feel like it's whenever you're searching for something, if you search it in Japanese and translate it in English, it's going to be better than if you view the English language version of this same page, because it's going to be completely different information a lot of times. I don't know if people knew that or not, but it's definitely very different. Usually, I haven't actually checked the English language version of this page, but so anytime I have a link over here, I'm just gonna put it over here for you guys to kind of look at while I go into explanations. But these are what Onis look like. You can tell, and they've got like red skin and all this kind of. This is more stereotypical Oni. But they look completely different, and they have a completely different nuance than an ogre or a Western demon, which is why I thought this was important. But it implies this type of Japanese demon, so to speak, but not demon as you think about them in terms of Christianity, which I feel like a lot more people in the West are used to the Christian kind of understanding of what a demon is when they hear the word demon, and not just thinking about an Oni, which is, again, a completely different thing. So I'm going to explain what they are, yay! Oni in Buddhism are kind of like deities who fell from grace. Fallen celestial beings, punished spirits, and they can be seen consuming human vitality, which again aligns with them wanting the Chakra Fruit. Sometimes Oni can also be humans transformed by negative emotions, or souls punished in the afterlife. I don't think that applies to the Otsutsuki in Naruto, but it is something to note just in case they decide to tie it in somehow. Oni are associated with natural disasters and misfortune, as well as cruelty, greed, and jealousy. They're usually self-destructive, but they're not always 100% evil. In anime, a lot of times you'll see them reforming their ways, and sometimes they seem kind of nice, like in Dragon Ball when Goku falls off Snake Way. Unlike other random yokai, however, Oni are also associated with evil and punishment, whereas some yokai are just mischievous but not necessarily harmful, like the Kappa from, if you have been keeping up with my Hiragana series and the story that comes at the end of those, or fox spirits. If you watch Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, you'll see what I mean, because there's a lot of the stuff that ends up being talked about. That's like a very Shintoism, Buddhism kind of like Japanese religious culture surrounded anime, and it's really, really useful for explaining these kinds of concepts and teaching these kind of things. So I will be bringing it up a few more times throughout this analysis, but hopefully if you haven't watched it, it's pretty short as of right now. I think there's only 2 seasons out, and you only have to really watch season 1, which is just a short 13 episodes. It's really cute anime. But anyway, Momoshiki and Kinshiki as well, really all the Otsutsuki, have horns, can be 1 or 2, which is a key feature of Oni. Kinshiki's build, being a giant with huge muscles, is also significant to the Oni warriors in terms of someone that might protect something else, which is another common thing for an Oni. Their clothes look like Heian-era noble garments. So, I think I linked... Yeah, I did. Haha. Hold on. Let me show you pictures, hopefully. So these are kind of like the more nobility robes. They're more colorful, and then the priests wear these kind of these white robes. So kariginu are garments ancient nobles wear when hunting, joe are purified robes for ceremonies, and shozoku umbrella this category and are just the traditional garments worn by Shinto priests, which can be broken down into several different categories, but kariginu and joe are part of joso or ordinary clothes. So you can see this this website goes into the differences, and it goes into like these are like shrine maidens or miko, if you know what that is. So you can see, you can also copy and paste these words and look up pictures individually of what each robe looks like. But since you mentioned Western culture, I'll also add the difference between Oni and demons. Okay, so demons are typically evil beings that oppose God, represent sin and Satan's followers, and in movies they're given far more of a fear factor role, except for things that cartoonize them like Has Been Hotel, or they're just pitted as in opposition to Christianity and heaven. Again, same as Has Been Hotel, but I know there's more cartoons than that. Oni are evil but not always irredeemable. They sometimes appear as comedic and funny or even protective over a village. They're morally fluid, and this whole opposition to heaven thing or belonging in hell doesn't really apply, especially the heaven part, since most people believe in reincarnation. There are a lot of festivals like Setsubun where they use Oni to teach kids lessons and scare them into behaving and throw beans at them. But they also just have traditional dances, especially during local cherry blossom festivals where people put on Oni costumes and dance. I should have taken a video at my cherry blossom festival just a couple weeks ago, but I wasn't thinking and did not take a video. But they had, like, they were playing music, and they had the Oni dancing, and then they had like little kids come out. It was really cute. Anyway, ironically enough, dancing in an Oni costume is also supposed to drive away bad spirits and cleanse the community of bad luck. So what's interesting about Momoshiki and Kaguya is actually their long flowing hair. Usually Oni have crazy wild hair that sticks out all over the place, and if I can show you, I'll show you pictures of, you can see like they have this hair that kind of just is like scraggly a little bit. Usually. But Momoshiki and Kaguya have this really long flowing hair that paints them as kind of this more nobility, godlike kind of Oni instead of like a demon ogre kind of Oni, if that makes sense. It also links them more to nobility just design-wise, and makes sense why they would be the ones to devour the Chakra Fruit, while the other less like royalty looking Oni sacrifices themselves, along with the whole parent role thing that comes up a lot in this novel that I will tie in later. So now we're getting to this term seed plot. So what is this term for seed plot? Is it analogous to garden? The term for seed plot is naedoko, and I'm actually going to copy and paste this and show you exactly what it looks like because I didn't link a thing here. But you can see it's this. It's like these little containers with soil for the seeds, and it's separated little containers for each like sapling, so you can take them out and then plant them into a bigger once they're fully grown. So this is what it's talking about, versus when you look up seed plot, it has some pictures of the same thing, but it gives you like big fields, and that's not really what it's talking about. So just keep in mind that it's this. And I found this whole page explaining it really in depth as well. This goes in really, oh sorry, you can't read this. Translate, okay, what is a nursery? Yeah, so it translates it to nursery in this example, but it's just the word naidoko. So it gives all these things about what it is and how to tend to them. So if you're interested in what Momoshiki is kind of calling the planet, Naruto's planet right now, as a seed plot, this will tell you everything that you need to know. But to give you a bit of a summary, a seed plot is when you split up all the seedlings into these separate containers and help them grow individually before transferring them to a bigger pot or a garden or whatever you're transferring them to. According to the website going in depth about explaining these things, naidoko specifically refers to the soil used for growing seeds and the container for placing the soil. So this thing and this soil there. So in the context of what Momoshiki is saying, the seed with the most potential to bear the most fruit amongst all the other seeds, the humans, is Naruto because he's got the most abundant and powerful chakra. Momoshiki and Kinshiki explained the Chakra Fruit. Page 170. Again, I have all the pages, so if you have the physical copy of the novel, you're more than welcome to look at the Japanese for that as well, or take pictures of the page, whatever you want to do. The translation was provided by Kakutua. Context. Momoshiki and Kinshiki first appear in the arena, interrupting the Chunin exams. They begin to comment on the people in the arena before Kinshiki engages Sasuke. This is their translation, and I did not retranslate this one. I am Otsutsuki Momoshiki, the younger ogre gave his name. I am Otsutsuki Kinshiki, the giant ogre gave his name as well. He had a thundering voice. What are you after? We only want to start over what Otsutsuki Kaguya, who used to be in the seed plot, failed to carry out. That being retrieving the scattered chakra by gathering it into one fruit. The ogres had given their objective. Insights requested. Is the term ogre used as the same as the one above? Yes, it's still Oni. Is the term seed plot used as the same as the one above? Yes and yes. So again, seed plot is this, and you can check out all the stuff here. We'll have this blog post linked as well, so you can just click on the links in the blog post. This one, I'm not going to nitpick this translation, because it's fine being taken literally since it's not really conveying any sort of emotional thing, and the nuance is fine even without the garden analogy. Momoshiki and Kinshiki prepare to launch the amplified 10 Tails Bijudama. So this can be found on page 176 to 177, and again, provided translation by Kakutua. Moments after the above, Momoshiki has rained a firestorm down on Naruto, and now seeks to conclude the fight. Annoyance. That one word was what Momoshiki was feeling. He could see that the people of the star were practically using the chakra that Kaguya had left behind in their own way. If it had been the people of any other star, then they would have been annihilated with his first blow. It didn't amuse him for these ones to cause him so much trouble. A few lines have been skipped here by the requestee. A large clump of energy appeared from Momoshiki's left hand. It was the tailed beast bomb he'd inhaled from the 8 tails. It had been amplified several times over, to the point that it now looked like a comet that foretold their ruin. That ominous light dominated everything. So I also did a retranslation of this one here, even though it wasn't requested, because there was just some things that I wanted to fix up. How bothersome. The feeling that encompassed Momoshiki in that moment could be described by that single thought. It seemed as though the pests on this planet took it upon themselves to use the chakra Kaguya left behind in their own pitiful manner. The people of other planets could usually be eliminated with the first attack. The fact that their resistance had lasted this long did not amuse him in the slightest. Momoshiki materialized a large clump of energy in his left hand. It was a Biju bomb he'd previously absorbed from the 8 tails. Amplified many times over, it resembled a comet heralding destruction. That ominous light bore down on everything. I'll get more into what I changed in the breakdown, but for the stuff that I don't get into. How bothersome is indeed Momoshiki's internal thought, but the next line changes it to that one word in Japanese, so I just changed it to one thought in English to keep the nuance of him actually thinking it as a thought, since the Japanese was still 2 technical words, I guess you can say. So, mendo da. Anyway, instead of keeping the nuance of that one word, I kept the nuance of it being his internal monologue for that thought instead. The pests comes from the fact that Momoshiki is annoyed enough to use the domo suffix to mono, so monodomo, so it's less people and more just like those annoying creatures. Meanwhile, for the people he can eliminate easily, he didn't use domo and just called them mono. So I wanted to slip that nuance in there because I thought it was funny. He's annoyed at these people enough to call them domo, which, if you remember me explaining Two Blue Vortex Chapter 1, I talk about that again when Kawaki uses it for the other ninja, like the shinobi domo, he's like... Anyway. Own pitiful manner, again, comes from the nuance of him just being annoyed, and the vocab he's using to look down on and insult them. It's more of an implied part of the tone than an actual literal word there in Japanese, if that makes sense. Momoshiki didn't just magically will the bomb to appear, he materialized it, so it's more like something emerging or manifesting and not just suddenly popping into existence, which I think they had appeared in their translation. Appeared, yeah, so I just translated to materialize instead. Seedplots is breathing inhaled, because they used inhaled for absorbing the thing, but without breathing in front of it, like iki o suitoru. Without breathing, it just means to absorb something or to suck it up, so I changed it to absorb the Biju bomb instead of inhaled the Biju bomb, if that makes sense. And I'll get into the other stuff below. Alright. Insights requested. Is it safe to assume that this star refers to planet Earth? What is the specific word used in Japanese here? My answer was, nowhere in Boruto does it mention Earth as the planet we live on. At least not to my knowledge. As the planet we live on? As the planet they live on, it should be anyway. At least not to my knowledge. But I could have missed something in some novel somewhere, and if it was there, it would likely be a typo, because all throughout Boruto, from what I've seen, and from the light novels, it's usually referred to as star, which is hoshi, or planet. And planet is just another translation of hoshi, because it can be either. The Japanese word there is hoshi, which I didn't put in, I didn't tell you how to pronounce that, oops, which literally means star, but it's also commonly used to refer to planets. And I have another page for you. English, there we go. A complete guide to what stars are, types, and evolution at a glance. So this is a page in Japanese going very in depth about what the difference between a star and a planet is, and all these, there's comets here too. You can see a lot of interesting information. This is a pretty good website. That goes more into depth about hoshi and what they are in terms of Japanese. Since nuance level, it's a bit different from star or planet in English, but I'll go over the main parts here. There's actually a huge list of dictionary entries, which I'm also going to show you. Hey, here we go. You can see there's just a lot of entries here. And then there's more down here. Star, celestial body, and you can see all the dictionary information. Star. Yeah, this is a very long page in comparison to what it normally is. And you can see fortune telling, it gives you all this interesting information. But yeah, feel free to check that out if you want to know more about stars and what they mean in Japanese in comparison to what they mean in English. But anyway, in this context, it's talking about the first definition over here, a glowing celestial body that includes planets but excludes the sun, earth, and moon. Are? Did I mess that up? Did I read that wrong? ちょっと待って. Show original. Removed. だよね。だからこれ絶対に違うんでしょ？普通に。ちょっと待って。Excluding? I was right. Excluding the sun, earth, and moon. Okay. Notice how it says, usually among celestial bodies, sun, earth, and month, excluding star, planet, comet, whatever. Sometimes this translation thingy gets what's in here wrong. So if you're questioning it, just copy and paste it into Google Translate, I guess, because it says, generally this refers to stars, planets, comets, star clusters, and constellations, but excludes the sun, earth, and moon. This is not very trustworthy, I suppose. Oh, sorry, there was a little bit of technical difficulty. Not technical difficulty, but it's the translator being dumb. Okay. Is Google any better? Okay, yeah, this is much better. I think maybe it's too zoomed in. Can I fix it? なんか全然見えないからね。わかんないよ。とりあえず、これでいいんじゃない？こうしよっか。大丈夫そうね。多分。The biggest difference is that there isn't a strict classification between stars and planets, because while Hoshi is more commonly translated to star and Wakusei is more commonly translated to planet, you probably already noticed the kanji for star is in the kanji for planet. So, star. In other words, a planet is a specific type of star. So then Wakusei, there you go. Wakusei usually refers to the 8 known planets in the solar system, and it has certain qualifications it has to meet. Wakusei, or planets, have to be spherical with no other objects than satellites in their orbit. Boruto's planet might not fit these classifications, so despite being a planet in a sense, they use Hoshi to make it a little bit more ambiguous. Earth has its own name, Chikyu, and it's made up of completely different kanji. While it falls into the classification of being a planet, the name itself, well, just like all other planets in the solar system have names, Earth is Chikyu. Boruto's planet isn't Earth. There's also this word sekai, which I am going to show you the definitions of in just a moment. It roughly means world, but that's got a ton more nuance and is also very specific to the situation, which I'll get to later when it comes up in a more relevant context. So in other words, Boruto does live on a planet in the English sense, but perhaps not in the Japanese sense, since they wanted to make it a little bit more ambiguous, so they use this word hoshi, or star, and that gives off a more kind of sci-fi or fantasy vibe without putting too many constraints on it. What is the word used for comet? Could it be hokiboshi or suisei? The word there is indeed suisei. I'm also going to link an interesting page talking about comets. So I will show you here. The English version. I can just... 日本語、英語、お願いします。There we go. Okay, so you can see this whole page this goes really in depth about comets. And you can see, especially in this section, the thing that's interesting about comets is how Japanese people believe that they're bad omens or carry with them misfortune. And this is used a lot in literature. So yeah, this is like a very short little section here, but you can see a lot more if you just straight up Google it, especially in Japanese. I just found this page that gives a big overview, so I figured if there was any other nuanced things you wanted to look into about comets, then here you go. It's used in this context here in that way, as well as it being a hairbringer of misfortune. But a long time ago, people thought that comets predicted death and disaster because after their appearance, horrible disaster often struck, death of kings, fires, and mass suicides, etc. Of course, not all comets were perceived as bad omens. Some were said to have brought good fortune as well, but as obsessed with astrology as Japan is, it's not uncommon for them to use astrological-related metaphors in literature. For context as to how into astrology Japan really is, the daily horoscope is often told in the newspaper and on the morning news, as well as many people believing in tarot cards and divinations, with merch of those being made for collabs with anime. Boruto actually has a set too. I don't own them, but like Cardcaptor Sakura is very popular with tarot cards and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people in school bring them to school and do like divinations and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, most people know their zodiac signs as well as what it means. Not that everyone is like this, but it's much more common in Japan than it is in the West. So again, like obviously what I'm saying about Japan is like this does not apply to everyone in Japan. But if you do go up to ask someone and be like, what's your zodiac sign? If they say, I don't know, it would be kind of like a, マジで知らないの? You don't know? Like, instead of like a, oh, well, that's normal. When's your birthday? So a comet foretelling the ruin is just a metaphor most people understand, whereas in the West, they might not have used this particular analogy of this giant looming thing being like a comet. I couldn't think of any other analogy to put there, so if you know of something that's like a giant, not like a wrecking ball, but like, like a meteor or something. Meteor showers are kind of fun, I guess, but well, something that would go. Anything else that I could put there that would be localized, like the freaking jelly donuts in Pokemon that I'm gonna bring up all the time. All right, anyway. Could you please elaborate on the phrasing used for dominated everything? The phrasing there in Japanese is subete o ashiteiku. There are many readings for this kanji, this one. In this context, the way it should be read with the shite is ashite. The meanings according to Kotobank are apply a strong force or hold something down, and subdue, overwhelm is in military strength. And usually it's used in authoritarian context or making someone submit. So you can see all that over here, the military power and overwhelming others, blah, blah, blah. I see dominated as a potential meaning on jisho, but because jisho can oftentimes be wrong and gives little to no context other than the example sentences, which sometimes do and sometimes don't exist, which is also really frustrating. I instead usually look to Japanese dictionaries like this one or Weburio. That one's pretty good. There's a lot of different dictionaries, and there's one that like goes through every nuance of the word and explains it really in depth. But they only have that for some words. Obviously, it's not everything. But yeah, jisho isn't great because it just tries to give you word equivalents. Like if you jisho. If you paste this into here, to oppress, to dominate, to overwhelm, and then you can do like a sentence search, and you can see it's quell, suppress, put down. So it depends on the sentence, obviously, is how it's translated to, so you want to look at in context instead of just looking at this, because if you just look at this without knowing what context it's used in, you might get it wrong. But yeah, so I usually use this, and you can use this as well and just translate it to English and then get the meaning, but be careful what web browser you're using to translate, because apparently Opera doesn't work. Yeah. There's another kanji, oshite, that is used similarly and can have similar meanings, but it's primarily used for push in a sense of pushing an object, where this, which can also be read as oshite, implies a much stronger force pressing down on or subduing something. Because if you say like osunayo, it means like, hey, don't push me in the hallway. But like this would be like, nante iwaindaro, like the cops like holding somebody down, like suppressing them. So instead of dominating everything, subete in this case does just mean everything, which is the word used in the sentence. I would instead translate it to that ominous light bore down on everything, to get that nuance of it kind of covering everyone and that helpless feeling, as well as the feeling of being crushed by pressure, or like emotional pressure of how large it is, forcing you to abandon your hope. And the ashiteiku part gives it like a spreading effect, like it kept going and expanding until it coated everything in the viewer's perspective, not necessarily the whole star or the whole planet. You can also say smothered, weighed down on, engulfed everything under its weight, or a combo that has more than just one word and extends it for nuance. That ominous light bore down on everything, crushing all resistance. Although I feel like this is doing a little too much, because it doesn't really need to be doing that much. But the correct nuance in this context, this particular context, is more about how the light felt dominating in that moment, suppressing, restricting everyone's movements, and crushing them under the weight of their own fear. I don't think there's a word like that in English, but if you know of one, please by all means, let me know. Naruto wakes up in Momoshiki's dimension. This is from page 192. Translation again provided by Kakutua, but I am also going to retranslate this, I believe, yes. Context. This is the very, very beginning of chapter 5. Naruto was inside darkness. He didn't think they'd gotten very far from the village of Konohagakure, but rather than saying that this was some place he didn't remember, it'd be more accurate to say that this was a parallel world. It was terribly cold and distortions rippled through the sky. It plainly wasn't the airspace of his own world. Kaguya had held the power of sending people into parallel worlds, too. Is this something like a Kekkai or a subspace? About half of it looked like the second-hand knowledge he had of the games his son played, but this place shouldn't be all that different from his own world. Naruto's movements were hindered. He was physically restrained. He quickly realized he was bound to a pillar. Requested retranslation by me. Naruto was immersed in pitch-black darkness. He didn't think they'd gotten too terribly far from Konoha, but he had no remembrance of the place he was in. Rather, it was more accurate to say that this was a completely different place altogether. Within the dark, the sky above him was warped. It was clear that this place was not of the world that he knew. Kaguya had the power to send people to different places too. Is this a boundary? Or maybe it's a separate spatial layer? His understanding in part was borrowed second-hand knowledge from the games his son played, but it shouldn't have been too far off from the reality of the situation. He couldn't move. Something was physically restraining him. He soon came to the understanding that he'd been tied to a pillar. As you can see, there are clearly a lot more important things of difference here, so let's address them one by one, along with your questions, because this part is the longest part here, I think. Insights requested. Inside darkness. Is this accurate, or would it be more accurate to say surrounded by darkness? As you can see from my translation, I chose a completely different wording, immersed in pitch black darkness. The Japanese there is, Naruto wa kurayami no naka ni ita. It literally means Naruto was in darkness. Like, well, okay. I'm just gonna let my words do the work here instead of trying to over-explain. English, here you go. Completely dark, without any light, also a place of darkness, a place hidden from view, a place unknown to people, having no prospects and no hope for the future. You can see all those over there. It's a combo between kurai, so this kanji here, and darkness, which is this kanji here. So it means like, not just dark is when it gets dark outside because the sun goes down, but like pitch black darkness. Darkness is his whole environment, he's immersed in it. And it's kind of all three of these definitions at once. So, however, in the movie novel, right next to this page with this text, is a picture of Naruto in this strange place. And there is some light shining on his face. I wish I could show you this picture. I don't have it prepared, but the novel was written before the movie was done, since this novel is Kishimoto's script for the movie, and the screenwriter used it to write the movie. Then it was bound, and screenshots for the movie were added to make it a full publishable light novel, which you can check out my interviews page on my blog. For more information about this, you can find it in this interview right here, but I have a whole page on the movie novel stuff, and this is the Boruto and Sarada analysis that I did for their birthdays that you've probably already seen if you follow me, but that's okay. This is one of those places where the movie wouldn't have been able to depict this happening in pitch black, or it would make for one very sad scene, so they likely took the metaphorical meaning, but there's a bit of conflicting information here. For now, I'll explain this word kurayami has an emotional nuance of isolation. It can also have the emotional nuance of despair or being lost, spiritually and mentally, but that really only applies if the context surrounding it applies, and Naruto isn't really one to despair. From his thoughts in this situation, he's much more chill and curious than worried, so even though this could exist, I don't really think despair applies here, but being lost and isolated definitely does. So we can say being surrounded by darkness or in darkness, the nuance here feels more encapsulating, and it's meant to give off a sense of dread or doom and gloom, and kind of like a place that he just doesn't know where he is, which makes sense given the following lines as well. Alright, now we're getting into the big question. Place, parallel world, kekkai, subspace, world. For each of these terms, please identify the specific word in Japanese that is used, as well as any nuances between each term. Specifically, I'm trying to understand if we as readers are meant to interpret this space that Naruto is now in as a planet, somewhere in the universe, the same as the main universe that Konoha exists in, a subspace within the universe, analogous to Kamui or Gamahyoro. For context, Gamahyoro is the jutsu where Jiraiya goes inside of a dimension, inside of a small frog gourd. He pulls one of the paths of pain into the dimension, and it's described as a barrier space. A completely different parallel universe, like a branching timeline in Marvel, or perhaps it's more ambiguous and open to interpretation. So this is the most correct of those, I'll tell you now, but there's a lot to get into, so let's go over it. First, I made a list of each one separately so you can see what they are from my translation, left to compare to Kakatu's translation on the right. Basho is place. We both translated this to place. Ikai is completely different place, and they translated it to parallel world. Konoyo, the world he knew, or his own world, so it's pretty similar. Kukan, surroundings, airspace. I don't know if I left this as surroundings or not, because I feel like I might have changed that. This place. Yeah, I changed it to place. I went back and changed this around a couple times the more digging I did for, like, trying to make sure that the words that I were explaining had the most accurate nuance instead of what I just initially said, oh, this will work, and then I did more digging and I was like, oh, but they might think of it like that. So I changed it to place instead, but it can also be surroundings. Kukan, when I go over the meaning of the word kukan, you'll kind of understand a little bit more why I initially translated it to surroundings, because in this specific context. But anyway, Kakatu translated it to airspace. Kekkai is, I think I left it as boundary again, and here I just originally had barrier space, sorry I didn't fix this up. And they left it as Kekkai, which I don't really understand why that is. Akukan is a place between worlds, or a subspace is what they translated to, and it literally means subspace, yes, but I picked place between worlds for, again, a reason you'll see down below. And Jitai, I don't understand where they got this from, really, but it should be in this specific situation, Jitai should be the correct understanding that he gained from his knowledge, if that makes sense. So, but now we're going to go line by line so you can see the breakdown of why I did what I did, as well as giving you the ability to gather your own understanding of what you may need it for in the future, since one word is never enough, and that's why I changed them 50 million times and forgot to change them here. So first is this sentence, which contains the words for basho in ikai, which I translated to place in completely different place, but again, I have the whole thing here. So you can see. この葉隠れの里からさほど離れたとも思えぬが、見覚えのない場所というよりは異界だった。Kakatua's translation is, he didn't think they'd gotten very far from the village of Konohagakure, but rather than saying that this was some place he didn't remember, it'd be more accurate to say that this was a parallel world. My translation was, he didn't think they'd gotten too terribly far from Konoha, but he had no remembrance of the place he was in. Rather, it was more accurate to say that this was a completely different place. Instead of debating over English nuances, I'm going to give you the Japanese nuance and let you decide for yourself what it means for you. You can click on the first appearance of the word for a dictionary link. I recommend reading this on laptop if you're reading, but I am opening everything for you so you can see it, because I thought that was very important. あれ? 違う. Okay. The word basho here for place in this context is more literally along the lines of an actual place, a place where something exists or take place, literally, like the place I am currently sitting, the place that you buy chicken from, the physical location where something happened. There's different words and phrases that incorporate this one that can slightly alter the definition, but they don't apply in this context, so basho is just place. So he had no remembrance of the place he was in. This place he is talking about is a very vague word to describe where he is. So in this context, basho refers to Naruto, talking about a location that he doesn't remember, so just a location. And then we get to ikai. So you can see in this, it's more about, it gives you like a whole thing instead of just some words, which is why I have it. This time I'm linking Lovely because Kotobank doesn't give enough context. This word is a little bit more complicated and requires more than just a simple dictionary definition, so scroll down to the overview part down here. If you auto-translate the page, you should be able to read it again. Ikai directly translates to other world, but you may have heard the term isekai, which has the full actual word for world, sekai, in it, which I mentioned above. But this word ikai does not have the se, or yo, which if you, I'm just going to show you this in a new tab really quick. So you can see that this is the world part. World, generation, world. It's a lot of things here, but I don't know why it's not putting them into lines. Interesting. But it does not have this kanji in it, which is the kanji for world. It just has i, which means different, and again, I linked as well so you can see them. And no English. different. Again, being different also have different. This like looking up one kanji alone isn't going to give you like the meaning of a word. So, but just knowing the meanings of the kanji is important for the context of the word. This is the part that makes it like isekai fully means different world, right? But I means different, and then sekai means world. This kai part, this is missing the world part. So you just have this I and then this kai, which you guys are interested in, likely. So here's this as well. There we go. A division that separates space. So anyway, Ikai is not a fully different world or parallel world in terms of being a full world, like with its own systems and all that jazz. That only fits into the category when it's the world Isekai, hence the genre title. Ikai is a different division of space not as an outer space, but in the space surrounding you and me, the space taken up by a room, translated as completely different place instead. Like, it's very broad in Japanese still, and you don't want to give too much nuance that isn't correct, if that makes sense. I don't know how I would translate this officially because I feel like completely different place doesn't quite fit. It's something that isn't narrowed enough for you to think. Like, parallel world is way too specific. This whole paragraph is completely rejecting the word world. It's avoiding defining it as a world, so you definitely can't take that definition because, again, it avoids that kanji entirely. But because I don't want to make it too specific when it is being very vague and broad in Japanese, I translate it to a completely different place. Man, my laptop is really struggling right now. If you'd like to read more about the differences between isekai and ikai, here is a link for an article that even a junior high school or middle school students should supposedly be able to understand in Japanese, and I'll show you why that's the case in just a second because it literally says that on the website. It's really funny. It's look how cute this is. A thorough explanation of the differences between other worlds and alternate realms, a clear guide to the difference that even middle school students can understand. Congratulations, wow. Okay, so now this is going to be talking about, so you can see isekai and ikai here, but when you Google Translate it, it says other worlds would be isekai and alternate realms would be ikai. But both words are translated by the auto translator when I was originally using Opera while I was writing this to like look at what the translation stuff was because I was writing this in Opera. But anyway, apparently that translation is kind of bad. Oh, it leaves it. Oh, wait. Another world and another realm affects. Okay, so another world would be isekai and another realm here would be ikai, but this is again just how Google Translate takes it, so do not take the English nuances of realm and apply it here because that is not what the Japanese is talking about. Like, I gave you the definition in Japanese, so use the Japanese definition instead of what this one word equivalent thing is trying to translate it to make it make sense in this specific context for you, because that's not what it's talking about over here. So you can't take the nuance of the world realm and try and argue something. Don't do that. That is bad. That's how people make mistakes when they're trying to argue for things. Because they're just, you can't. So a word in another language has a lot of nuance, just like when you look up the word. Let's definition. Okay. A domain, a field, or an area of interest referring to a kingdom ruled by a monarch or a specific sphere of knowledge or activity. This does not apply to this. So don't use this word to try and mean this. This is not what this is. It's just temporarily translating that as a filler word for here because it has to pick something, okay? If you want to know what this means, which is the actual word being used and not taking some random word that was Google translated, look at the actual definition page in Japanese, or you can even do this. Wow, copy and go over here and paste, and then you get all this Japanese info. Look, there's a whole Wikipedia page. Wow, you can click on this and find out even more information about the actual word being used and find out all the real nuances instead of looking at some nuances that don't exist. Wow, yeah. I'm sorry. It frustrates me so much when people do not know how to look up stuff or like think that just because it says realm here that you can take that as a meaning. No, it's wrong. Again, other world, this definition does not always apply. Like here, world is specifically being avoided. As I mentioned, it's not saying it does later, but here it is not saying sekai because it doesn't want to define it as a sekai. It does not want to define it as a world. So you can't take world into this definition because it's, again, specifically avoiding it, even though it talks about that in this like this overview thing right here, this other world overview thing, and maybe it also talks about it here and it translates it to other world. You can't take that meaning without looking at the whole entire rest of what it's talking about, because that's just, again, a filler word, because this word does not exist in English. It's going to be translated to many different things. On the other hand, the other realm often refers to a boundary, a dimension separate from reality, and is used in stories to emphasize the boundaries of different worlds. So you might not know what this word boundary means, which is why I'm going to get into it here as well later. Yay! Because all of these words don't exist in English, so they're just filler words for this translation, in order to describe it to you. So look at the description. Don't look at the actual word itself. Don't discuss over the nuances of whatever word it's being translated to. Always check the description. The description is the most important thing, not the translation. But it even talks about how it's really hard to translate this word into English because this concept doesn't exist in English fully. Yay! Here, where does it talk about that? When translating into English or other languages, multiple words, such as word, real, and dimension, may be considered. To convey the nuances of the original work without losing them, it's important to choose the most appropriate word considering the context and the target audience. Wow, thank you, website! By making an effort to choose expressions that are easy for readers to understand, which is why some people choose dimension and other world, even if it's not correct, the worldview of the work becomes clearer. Thank you, website. Thank you. But to summarize, isekai is a world which is completely different from the real world. This definition is important because it's a world which is different from the real world. And that can include entire explorable planes and possibly people and things to discover, and object permanence, and all that other kind of stuff. It can include that. I'm really trying to make sure people don't go jumping to conclusions, because this is where everybody's like, are you sure it can't mean this? And I'm like, no, it cannot. Stop asking me. So I don't like power scaling. Anyway. While ikai is a boundary or a barrier space or a dimension that's different from reality, but it isn't a world. This is very important to note. It's not a world. Okay. What is meant by boundary? Well, Naruto actually uses this word later, which is kikkai, which I translated to boundary or barrier space above. And even though it's similar to kamui, I think kamui is a kukan, which is a bit different. But anyway, we'll get there when we get there. The important thing is, it's not like a full-on world you could go explore with its own permanent objects per se. I rejected that word entirely from my translation because it's also rejected in Japanese, so you can't use it there. It doesn't apply, even though it's a potential English translation to make people understand it better. It doesn't apply to that nuance in this specific context, so you can't use it. Okay? But just because it's being vague and Naruto is confused as to what exactly this place is, it requires a bit more of a careful breakdown. So we're gonna continue breaking it down, even farther. Wow! Yay! Hidoku kuraku, sora ga yugandiru. Kakutu's was, it was terribly cold, and distortions rippled through the sky. My translation was, within the dark, the sky above him was warped. First, I have to talk about the mistake in Kakutu's translation. It doesn't say it was cold. The word kuraku means dark. I don't know where they got cold from. Probably a kanji mix-up, or maybe an OCR reading error, I'm not sure. But samui and tsumetai, or what those two are part of, are the kanji for cold, but neither of them look similar or have similar radicals to kurai, so maybe they were just tired and misread it, or didn't want to make the darkness seem repetitive. While I'm also at it, I'll say, no translator is perfect, myself very much included. I know I made a lot of mistakes in Light Novel 4 because it was one of the first things I translated, and everybody's always like, oh, your translation of Light Novel 4 is so good, and I'm like dying in a hole. But anyway, I'm not saying their entire translation is invalid because of this mistake. Please do not believe that ever. If a translator makes one mistake, does not mean that their entire translation is invalid. I know Viz makes mistakes, I make mistakes, other translators make mistakes. It's okay, as long as you go back and you're like, hey, I made a mistake here, then it's totally fine. Just as long as, be transparent. Talk about mistakes. Bring up, if you think I made a mistake, bring it up. Please tell me. definitely make a lot of them. But anyway, or because any change nuance I point out. I will say they do seem to be a newer translator and oftentimes take things extremely literally, using the most common equivalent substitution word instead of thinking about things on a nuance level and context, but they still translated the whole thing, and that's more than I've done because I overthink to the point that it takes me an hour per page, because I was working on translating this, and I barely got through the prologue in like 15 days. And I spent like almost, it's ridiculous. I was spending, I wasn't just an hour a page, it was like 3 or 4. It was ridiculous because I was sitting there going, I don't know about this. What if I translated this? Anyway, I wish I didn't have my brain sometimes. So, hidoku kuraku sora ga yugandeiru, word by word, means hidoku, terribly. Again, these are just one word things, but there's a whole list that you can probably apply. This is just the general, vague understanding of what you can get from this sentence in this context. I broke it down. Hidoku means terribly, kuraku means dark, sore means sky, and yugandiru means distorted. So kuraku has both the emotional nuance and literal nuance, similar to kurayami. Darkness is in inky blackness, and darkness is in hopelessness and doom and gloom. So it has all those like kind of underlying nuance things. I originally had it translated to inky blackness, especially since at the beginning of this novel it talks about Sasuke being in a darkness that is literally similar to ink when encountering the Otsutsuki. And again, despite this, there's light in the provided pictures, but the background behind him is completely blacked out. With Naruto's, the picture is so zoomed in that all you can see is him, and it looks like there's light. Obviously, if there wasn't light, there'd be no picture, but it also doesn't really make sense for it to be completely pitch black. In this context, this world that he's in currently. But the word yugandeiru, I have another link here. Wow, a link. Yes. The word yugandeiru directly means distorted or distortion, but it talks about the shapes of things being distorted or the state of something being abnormal. Despite being in pitch black darkness, Naruto can still observe the space that he's in and the area around him, especially the area above him. The sky seems to have been warped. The word warped sky here also implies that the space he's in has an unnatural ceiling-like vastness, as if it's infinite and you won't come across a ceiling, which you might not. But in reality, it's likely warped to make you view it as infinite, while the space around you distorts to continue giving off that illusion. So in these kind of spaces, object permanence doesn't usually exist, but again, we'll get to that later. This doesn't directly help define what the space is, because again, the only thing we know is it's not its own world, and it's weird, but it does give us this feeling of vast emptiness and distortion, as if it's an unnatural area, and it's not something of a place that Naruto knows, which is conveyed further by the next sentence. この世の空間でないことは明白だった. Kakutu's translation is, it plainly wasn't the airspace of his own world. My translation was, it was clear that this place was not of the world he knew. Now let's take a look at the second part. この世の空間ではないこと、でないことは明白だった. Word by word is a very literal one-to-one translation. It's この世. Again, this kanji is the word. Yeah, I'll get to that later. Okay, this world. 空間, space, is in the space around you, not outer space. ないことは, not of, 明白だった, was clear. Now you see that the kanji for world coming into play. This se, yo. Again, I explained it already, so I don't have any link because I already linked it. But this sentence is talking about this place not being a part of the world that Naruto knows. It's still not being described as a different world. It's just a separate kind of eerie place that very much isn't Naruto's world. Now let's talk about this word, kukan. This is where I always get backlash from people who want to argue power scaling, especially for Kaguya, because her dimensions are described using this word, and it doesn't mean worlds. Again, look at the description, not the direct translation. Look, the description is the most important part, because these words do not exist in English. Kamui's dimension is a kukan. Daikokuten is a kukan. Kaguya's dimensions are described as kukan. You might think, well then it just translates to dimension. It doesn't really though. So, again, what did I do? I don't know what I did. Oh, look how fast that loaded. How nice. So you can see all of these definitions here. This word kukan is often translated to space or dimension, but it doesn't mean outer space because that's a separate word, uchu. It doesn't mean dimension because that has a separate word, jigen, although sometimes it's easiest to translate kukan to dimension for English speakers to try and wrap their head around it, but it doesn't mean that necessarily. But kukan is different from a boundary, although you can refer to the area inside of a boundary as a space or a kukan. This word kukan is very vague. It's very, very, very vague, so you can't put a specific descriptor on it because it's literally just a space where no objects exist, also an area extending in all directions. Literally, that's it. It's a very vague word that simply defines an expanse over which an object can exist or move, and is a concept that includes a three-dimensional expanse. You can, again, I linked another dictionary for you to look at that has a little bit more. This is the one that goes into depth explaining. So, explain the meaning of the word space. You can look at all these beautiful things. How do you pronounce it? How to use the word space, and provides example sentences. Wow, you can see where they're used. Etymology of the word, the history of the word. So if you want to know about this word kukan, again, it does not exist as a word in English. So you can't say, oh, it means dimension, or oh, it means this. You have to take a look at the nuances as they are in Japanese. You can also translate this word to area or place. It's not a world, it's not a dimension, it's a field of existence that can be large or small and can potentially be controlled by the user, as is the case with Kaguya manipulating various forces of nature within each of her areas or spaces. Within. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't pronounce that word. Anyway, whether it's the size of a small room or a seemingly infinite scenery that is manipulatable to relocate as you move through it so you never run into a wall, or a place of infinite space that you can walk and never exit, we do not know. All we know is, again, that it's a place that's different from the world Naruto knows. And I feel like I had... Where did my thing go that was talking about... So, this word kukan, right? It can refer to, like, the space inside your head, the space inside your room. Like, I'm not gonna go on that tangent right now because I might get something wrong and then people are gonna I gave you all this information, so just use that information. Okay, sorry, I'm being so defensive right now. I had to deal with this so many times. Anyway, かぐやの人を異界に飛ばす力を持っていた。結界、あるいは空間、空間 that should have extra U のようなものか。Sorry, I sometimes read this English instead because I know I make mistakes when I'm typing it a lot of times, and then I have to go back and fix it, and I'm like, oh no, or this romaji is not English. But anyway, there should be an extra U right there. Kakatu's translation was, Kaguya had held the power of sending people into parallel worlds too. Is this something like a kekkai or a subspace? My translation was in parentheses because, again, it's Naruto's internal thought. I don't know why that translation was removed, or that nuance was removed. I guess maybe it was in italics in the original? I don't know. Kaguya had the power to send people to different places too. Is this a boundary, or maybe it's a separate spatial layer? Now we're into talking about Kaguya. Once again, it uses the word ikai without se or yo. So the things Kaguya creates are also not in the category of worlds, according to Naruto, in this specific context. I don't know about I know there's different things in the databook pages because I've been told to analyze this before, but in this specific context, he calls it ikai. A parallel world would again be categorized under the term isekai instead. Here she says she creates ikai, which again, this word doesn't really exist in English, even though it's often translated to otherworldly. It isn't referring to entire worlds, it's referring to, for example, entering into those paintings for levels in Super Mario 64. If you haven't played that game, you start off on a little planet with a castle, and inside the castle there's paintings that you jump into, and those are the levels that you complete, and then when you win or lose, you come back to the castle area. Anyways, those paintings are like an ikai, the little worlds that exist within a previously created world that you have to go through some sort of door to enter and exit, and the admin holds the key and chooses when to give them to you unless you have admin privileges, Otsutsuki powers, to skirt around that like Sasuke does with his Rinnegan, because the Otsutsuki are basically the admins of the universe, while Shiba is the game maker. That's as good of an analogy as I could think up. But anyways, using this Super Mario 64 analogy, ikai would be the worlds inside of the paintings. Isekai would be like N64 Mario traveling to Super Paper Mario's universe, to name an example. And that's a specific thing within isekai, because isekai is a very broad category that encompasses a lot of things, and ikai fits under isekai, but ikai is like more specific. So it's not, it can't be a world, where isekai can be a world and also just an ikai, but we're gonna get to that later. Even though it's still the Mario-verse, that going into another video game, even if it's the same Mario game, would be a parallel world. And that is not this. This is contained within the same universe. The paintings are actually a great analogy because, like I mentioned earlier, this is a place that's kind of attached to this world, but you need a special key or space-time ninjutsu to enter it. There's no definitions of the place other than the fact that it's a place that exists outside of the normal world, like the hallway in the big house for Mario 64, or the castle. But it's not its own separate world entirely, it's still connected, as we see from later sentences. And while it's nothing like the world Naruto knows, that doesn't mean it's like hopping into a different dimension or a completely different world or universe, because again, this word ikai or kukan doesn't exist in English, and those dimension or realm or whatever are just filler words that they're trying to use to like get you to relate to it and understand kind of what it is, but you can't take all the nuances of those words because they're not the same nuances as the Japanese words. Gonna hammer that point home as many times as I possibly can. What would you call the paintings in Super Mario 64? Because whatever term you use there applies to this, and I know they're levels, but like outside of them being levels. But that's the English word that you need. So I don't think that English word exists necessarily, but if it does, that's what you need. That's the one. So kekkai, we're moving on to kekkai. Let's give you the definitions of kekkai. お願いしますね。はい. Okay. Barrier. Or boundary, because I think it's usually translated in Hanaku-kun to boundary, but I'm going to explain it through Toileban Hanaku-kun or Jibaku Shonen Hanaku-kun, and then I'll try to break it down a little further. If you watch Toileban Hanaku-kun, a lot of this will make so much more sense, because it deals with boundaries, like in every episode. Boundaries are different than worlds or planets with their own systems, but mysterious spaces that exist in a different pocket of space than the real world, while simultaneously being able to interact with it, kind of. It can and can't interact with it. Usually the main character is given the powers to, like, interact with them. But that is a common theme within a lot of anime because that's part of Shintoism and Buddhism and all that. Well, it's mostly Shintoism, but anyway. One example is a house becomes a never-ending labyrinth that keeps people trapped inside it because that's part of the boundary. They can't cross back into the real world without a quote-unquote key of sorts, or breaking the quote-unquote walls that are keeping them in without special exorcism powers, because just destroying the front door or walls with brute force won't help, because it's not about the physical material objects, but the spiritual kind of plane that is keeping them separated from their quote-unquote world. Well, in that case, it is their world that they're being separated from, just like Naruto is being currently separated from his world. Even though it's a normal house on the outside and not everyone gets trapped there, it's warping space to make it so you can't get to the exit. It's not a different world, but a pocket of space, and again, by that I just mean some air or room again, not like outer space, that isn't accessible to normal people, that you need some sort of special power to enter, but it's not its own functioning society. A boundary is also a place within a world yet outside of it. This whole idea of a boundary or barrier comes from Shintoism and Buddhism. In Buddhism, it's separating the ordinary from the unordinary. In Shintoism, it's separating the sacred realm from the present world. Shrines are boundaries. Torii gates serve as the entrance. The steps leading up to the temple are intentional to make it like separate from the regular ground, and walls, fences, etc. All this kind of imagery of like fencing in this sacred area. Boundaries have the role of uniting two realms, the sacred realm and the secular realm. Even if nothing really happens when you enter a shrine in real life, and fantasy anime dealing with these concepts, the main characters are often given the special power to see the gods or yokai that inhabit them, and this happens in so many anime. I know, like Kami-sama Hajimemashite, I think it's called Kami-sama Kiss in English, and Jibaku Shonen Hanaku-kun, Toileban Hanaku-kun, or Noragami, or anything that deals with like, I'm sure there's a more popular example that I'm not listening right now and I feel really bad. But if you're kind of like given the power to be able to see through these barrier quote unquote things if you're in this main character in this anime. And Naruto deals a heck of a lot with Shintoism and Buddhism and all that kind of stuff, which I know Anime Explained does a lot better breakdowns on all this kind of stuff. But the more into Shintoism and Buddhism you get, the more you understand how much Kishimoto borrowed from all that those kind of concepts when he was making Naruto. So this feels like another borrowed concept, if that makes sense. It's less about being sci-fi-y and more about being Japanese religious-y, kind of this whole concept of like creating separate pocket dimensions and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense. So you might be wondering, what the heck does that mean for this? It means that Naruto thinks that perhaps this is some sort of place in between the world he knows and another realm of existence like the spirit world or the afterlife or whatever. But notice how this word also carries the kanji kai for kikkai. You see this kai right here, which is the same kai in ikkai, which is division of space, and not yo for world. So again, a boundary is in a separate world, just like how ikai is in a separate world, but it gives us this very much feeling of being separate than the world. It's just not its own separate world of itself. The first kanji not is used for tying things together, and it's often used in descriptions in Kaguya of how she weaves her spaces in the data books. It's the Musubu kanji, which again shouldn't be worlds or dimensions, but areas or spaces, because again, that's the vocab that's used there. But it carries this idea of connecting spaces or areas, just like a boundary does. So it connects, you can go boundary hopping from boundary to boundary through Hanako-kun's magical elevator thing. It's like Kaguya stitching the areas together is like Hanako-kun's magical elevator thing, if that makes sense. But this again, it's all gonna make so much more sense if you watch Hanako-kun. But this whole idea is very Shinto, and it's very hard for Westerners to wrap their heads around. But again, it's important to note that even if it was a boundary, it's still not a separate world. So Naruto is getting more and more specific with his narrowing of what this thing might be. First he starts very broad, it's just a place, and then he starts a place different from his world, different from the world that he knows, and then he's thinking maybe it's a boundary, so maybe it's like kind of in the spirit world kind of thing, where it's like connected to his world, but like in a separate space. And now the final word he's thinking is akukan. So you see the word kukan, which I already explained, appearing again. So you know it has something to do with that space word that we talked about earlier. But then the question becomes, what is this a, and how does it affect the meaning of the word? This is a kanji, which I'm going to show you. Here we go. Okay. That usually gives the word the prefix of sub, hence the translation subspace. But you need to know the nuances of space in order to understand what a subspace is, as well as the nuances of the Japanese word, because again, this akukan doesn't have all the same nuances. So in English, especially the sci-fi definition, subspace refers to a concept of a different plane of time-space that exists beyond our regular three-dimensional space. It allows for faster-than-light travel and other phenomena that are impossible in normal space. So this is where I got this definition from, but I'm not going to pull it up. I am, however, going to pull this one up because it's more important. Yay! I had the do I link Cultobank? I don't think I do, but I just sometimes Cultobank doesn't give enough because it's just straight up definitions. So I want something that goes into a little bit more depth. But you see, again, it's just translated to subspace here. But the important thing isn't the word that it translates to, but what comes after that. It's the explanation. That's the part that you can actually look at and then try to think of your own word, because this word isn't necessarily, it's not going to have all the same nuances. Gonna hammer that point home as many times as I can. Okay. Yeah, okay. It is an imaginary space that is somehow different from normal space. It's also recognized as an emptiness in which the physical laws of this world do not apply. Okay, so they're pretty close, but a little different, because one can just be an imaginary space that's somehow different from normal space. A space that has aspects different from the world that we live in. That's literally, that's the definition. Okay, so it does not include all of this stuff. Although it does, there is some overlap here, but it's not this specific. It's much more broad. So, but anyway, they're pretty close, a little different, because one can just be an imaginary space, blah, blah, blah. It is often compared to another word, ikukan, which uses the kanji i again for different, as seen from isekai, or ikai, different divisions of space. But it's not the same, and I think people pointing out the differences between different space and subspace can help you understand the definition a little bit more. Ikukan is a different space from the world we usually live in. The examples given are more about traveling to different countries, entering different worlds mentally through watching movies, or being left home alone when your family goes on vacation and feeling the kind of aura of your house change as if it was a different space. So those are all definitions of kukan, by the way. Going to a different country feels like going into a different kukan, like a different space. Entering different worlds mentally through watching your mental space is in a different kukan, or being left home alone when your family goes on in the aura. This aura of your house changes as if it was a different kukan. So all that applies to the word kukan, which is most similar to the English word space, but again, it has different nuances, if that makes sense. So anyway, it's still a real place, just different from whatever you're used to. So ikukan, that's the different part. Akukan, on the other hand, directly talks about the world of fantasy and science fiction. It's a creative word that doesn't describe real phenomena. For example, time travel in Doraemon, they go through subspace, or akukan, to get to the past. So that has an overlapping thing with subspace. But it's in general, it's a place that doesn't exist in the real world. So you can read
through some of this stuff as well. And there's examples of where it's been used for different shows and TV. It's very widely seen in fictional works. But yeah, this is a decent enough website to give you the nuance. This is also a website that talks about the difference between alternate space and subspace, or ikukan and akukan. So it talks about individually what they are individually, and then the difference, and then it gives you a summary. But you can see this as well. So again, you'll see it translates it differently in different spots depending on the context. Wow, imagine that. Okay, I'm gonna stop now. I'm sorry. I couldn't get too clear on all the nuances of this word from regular website searches, so I decided to ask AI. I know, taboo. But I really wanted to get more perspective between this word and the English word, which is something a normal internet search can't quite yield as well without me spending a lot of time researching a bunch of articles, which AI's purpose is to do that for you and summarize the information, which is why I chose to use it in this particular case. But as you can see from the rest of this document, I linked actual articles written by actual Japanese people and didn't use ChatGPT because ChatGPT is wrong a lot of times, so you should really fact check it. And it's getting worse, I believe, as well. We've been talking about this in college a lot as well, with how vague it's getting in terms of translation, because our translation professors a lot of times encourage us to like check and see what ChatGPT is using, so you can kind of like see when other companies and things are using AI, and also defend yourself and how you can be better. So a lot of times we'll use it in class and then like come up with our own definition and then see what AI says, and then it'll be like, oh, well, this part is way too literal and it doesn't give the nuance and context as well. Even though you prompted it with the context, it's still like talking about this, and they're missing this context from like way back when in the novel. Like it's a good tool, but it still shouldn't be everything, if that makes sense. So people that are using like Crunchyroll using AI subtitles and all that kind of stuff is very, very questionable right now. But I did check over this to make sure most of it was okay. But this is something that you can use AI for, I feel like, to explain these kind of differences in nuance, because it's really good at doing mass reads of information, but it's not necessarily as good at as understanding a whole entire text in context, because again, an interesting mistake that AI does with translation is if you give it too much, it only looks at one section and then it makes up the rest. So it's especially interesting if you're trying to like translate an essay, for example, and your essay is really long. Let's say you have a 5,000 word essay and you put it in, it'll give you like the first chunk, 3 or 4 chunks of your essay, let's say, if you have like them chunked out, and then the last couple ones, it'll be like, oh, do you want to talk about this thing? And it'll be completely made up information. So like whatever is in the initial prompt is fine, but whatever you ask after that, it could end up twisting things completely beyond what you intended for it to. So just be careful with using AI, I guess, for translation stuff in general. But here's the breakdown of what it returned for me when I prompted it with the context for what I was doing in terms of looking up the differences between these two words. They're adjacent but separate. It exists parallel to normal space, not accessible without some sort of ability or tech. So this is for the word akuka. Think overlapping reality layers, not visible but coexisting. Used for mechanics, not atmosphere. Akukan is often used when something is being stored, transported, or bypassed. Abilities involve space manipulation. Examples include teleportation, pocket storage dimensions, phasing objects out of normal space. So it feels more technical and functional than mysterious and mythological. Not inherently eerie or warped. Akukan does not automatically imply distortion, which it was talked about earlier, but or horror-like space or labyrinth-like environments. It can include those, but those are separate qualities. But again, the distortion was talked about earlier when the sky was distorted. So it kind of, that's kind of where more of where my interpretations from earlier came from. Difference from English subspace. In English, subspace is strongly tied to sci-fi jargon. It feels technological and physics-based and sometimes abstract for faster-than-light travel, signals, etc. In Japanese, akukan feels more broader and flexible. It can be sci-fi, supernatural, or ability-based, but it doesn't feel as strictly scientific as English subspace. So in other words, it goes along with my pocket storage dimension descriptions from earlier, like Kamui and Daikokuten. But once again, it has nothing to do with being an entirely separate world, but it doesn't have all the same nuances of subspace either because it's functioning like an alternate spatial layer, operating in a different spatial layer, hence my final translation. To summarize once again, the words being used here don't have anything to do with entirely separate worlds, but are more Naruto trying to wrap his head around the space he's currently in. Now on to the final quote for this section. 半分くらいは息子のやっていたゲームの設定の受け売りだったが、さほど自体からずれていないはずだった。Kakuto's translation was about half of it looked like the second-hand knowledge he had from the games his son played, but this place shouldn't be all that different from his own world. My translation was, his understanding in part was borrowed second-hand knowledge from the games that his son played, but it shouldn't have been too far off from the reality of the situation. Once again, there's some weird nuance level things going on here with Kakuto's translation. The word world doesn't exist in Japanese anywhere in that part, so the question you have for this section doesn't really apply. The word being used here is jittai. Basically just means reality in this context, but you have to scroll down for that definition on Kotobank if you clicked my link, because it also means being serious and honest, but the true form of something, its essence, its true nature. Yeah, you can see all that down here. Okay. In this context, it can be translated to reality because that makes sense with the situation. But yeah, sahodo means that much, jittai means reality, kara means from, zurete inai, not far off, and hazudatta should have been. I also snuck situation in there because it helps tie the nuance of the sentence together, even though that word doesn't specifically exist in Japanese, because if I had just said reality, an English speaker could have taken that as the reality of the world, which I think is what Kakuto ended up doing, and that isn't what's being talked about here since Naruto is referring to the reality or the understanding that he's drawn from the video games Boruto plays, since the grammar and the sentence ties it back to that. Overall, the interpretation should be, Naruto's various understandings shouldn't be that far removed from what is actually going on, despite some of his understanding coming from Boruto's video games. Okay. Boruto mostly plays JRPGs, from the understanding gathered from earlier in the book when I talked about him gaming with Shikara and Inojin with different class systems and teaming up for boss battles similar to Monster Hunter or maybe even Dragon Quest, but I'm not entirely sure what games Naruto saw him play. It was also likely from an earlier time of him being a littler kid and playing games, since he doesn't seem to be entirely invested in Boruto's life at the particular moment, as much as he was before he became Hokage. But since there's a lot of reference to video games throughout the novel, it makes sense for there to be a reference here. Although, except for the understanding that playing video games kind of absorbs you in a different world, I'm not too sure how this ties in, especially with the genre Boruto seems to be playing. But anyways, I made a video game reference earlier, so I think it works out. I think this is important to note because Kishimoto is filtering things through Naruto's point of view. So he can't say, it's definitely this thing, and it's saying it's not too far from the reality of the situation likely means one of those interpretations is indeed the correct one. He just couldn't expand on it from Naruto's limited perspective. But Naruto does get narrower and narrower and narrower in his perspective. But he isn't entirely supposed to know because he's supposed to be confused right now. So to summarize, it seems as though Naruto comes to the understanding that this place is the most similar to a place like Kamui or Gamahiro, but it's still a little bit ambiguous and open to interpretation. And by that I mean like the concept behind them. I don't mean the actual space inside them themselves. But because they're a little bit more of a dumbed down version from what the Otsutsuki can create, because the Otsutsuki are again more powerful and they have more knowledge about the jutsu, the chakra and manipulation and all that kind of stuff, and Shinjutsu as we figure out later in Boruto. But I'll get to that later. And it is an entirely separate world in terms of having a society of people and culture living there. So on to the final question for this chunk. Because making an entirely separate world, like making terrain is one thing, but then like making people and trees and objects and all the like vastly different terrains across one whole entire chunk of planet or universe is a completely different issue entirely. It's a completely different thing. But what term is used for pillar? Is there any chance it could be a divine tree or could it be a different object? The sentence there in Japanese is 物理的に拘束されていた。柱に縛られているのだとすぐに理解できた。He was physically restrained. He quickly realized he was bound to a pillar. Something was physically restraining. That was Kakuto's translation. This is mine. Something was physically restraining him. He soon came to the understanding that he'd been tied to a pillar. Very similar. So the term for pillar used here is hashira, which straight up means a normal pillar. Although this was filtered through Naruto's perspective again, so it could be a different object. He's just noticing that he's tied to something that resembles a pillar, even if it does directly say he's tied to a pillar in the sentence right there in plain Japanese. So he doesn't think he's been tied to a pillar-like object, he just comes to the realization, oh, I've been tied to a pillar. Very definitive in his internal monologue, but again, it's because it's filtered through his perspective, and his back is up against it, and he's in the dark. It very well could be something else. That context is just not provided. The next section. Yay! Momoshiki consumes Kinshiki. Page 211 to 212. Translation provided by Kakatua, which I will again retranslate later, but the context is Kinshiki has resigned to sacrifice himself. He unleashes a fury of attacks at the Gokage and allows himself to be absorbed by Momoshiki. The color of his flesh changed. Chakra spurted out from all over his body. From the very beginning, this star was the Otsutsuki's seed plot. He yelled, "Come now, the time for all the chakra to be eaten has come." He was truly an ogre. Those who would eat the soul of someone who'd been like a father couldn't be anything other than an ogre. That was their law. Momoshiki, who had passed from an ogre into a comrade-eating fiend and transformed into an inhumane demon, began to suck in the chakra from his surroundings. He was even draining the chakra that was beyond the parallel dimension he'd been. Sasuke could clearly see the stream with his Rinnegan. It could only mean one thing. Don't tell me he plans to indiscriminately eat up all the star's chakra. They couldn't allow such a thing to happen. This wasn't a problem of scrambling for the Biju anymore. This was a question of whether mankind who lived on the star would be able to greet tomorrow. This is the requested retranslation by me. As his flesh changed colors, chakra erupted from Momoshiki's body. This planet was destined to serve as a garden, seedlings for the Otsutsuki to reap. The time is at hand to consume every last drop of chakra. Now his form was unmistakably that of an Oni. Having devoured the soul of his father figure, he had no choice but to become such a being. That was the fate of their kind. Momoshiki had surpassed an Oni and become a Rakshasa, something inhumane, fundamentally corrupt beyond redemption, a demon of karmic corruption. He began drawing in the surrounding chakra. The absorption seeped out of the world he constructed. Sasuke read the flow with his Rinnegan. It could only mean one thing. No way! He can't be! He is. He intends to drain the chakra on our planet dry without regard for anything. At this point, the fight had gone beyond a struggle for the tailed beasts. It was now a question of whether or not humanity would live to see another day. Before I get into the questions asked, I have to clarify some translation things because once again, as you can see, the translations are quite different, and of course I adopted the previously used style with bullet points after adopting this one, but it's whatever. The first sentence was, "The color of his flesh changed. Chakra spurted out from all over his body," was Kakajua's translation, and mine was, "As his flesh changed colors, chakra erupted from Momoshiki's body." There's just a few things nuance-wise. So kawatte-iki implies a bit more of a gradual change where something else is happening, hence the "as his flesh changed" in my translation. The second thing is funshitsuru, which applies to geysers and volcanoes. It's more like a violent shooting out of something, so I picked the word erupt instead. The second difference was Kakajua's translation. From the beginning, the star was the Otsutsuki seed plot. He yelled, "Come now, the time for all the chakra to be eaten has come." And then my translation was, "This planet was destined to serve as a garden, seedlings for the Otsutsuki to reap. The time is at hand to consume every last drop of chakra." Momoshiki speaks with an archaic tone in Japanese, so I tried to incorporate that into my translation. This was again before I went back and added those other retranslations. Dialogue tags. He yelled, he said, she said, aren't usually placed in Japanese because the characters' tones are so different that you can tell who is speaking based on pure dialogue, but oftentimes in English they are needed because tone is conveyed through manner of speech more so than the actual phrasing itself. Although with things like more extreme personality types and accents, like Momoshiki's being archaic, there are exceptions. Translators often add dialogue tags in order to avoid confusion and help with the flow, which is likely what Kakatua was doing with the line he yelled, because it's clear he was yelling through the exclamation points at the end of his lines, even if that isn't in Japanese. I didn't put the dialogue tag because I'm not wanting to include a lot of dialogue tags in my writing, especially translations, unless they are absolutely necessary. But I talk more about planet versus star and seedplot versus garden in the questions that were asked below, so I'll save that explanation for later instead of having it twice. I also explained it above, but anyway. On top of me making the last sentence more archaic, I just wanted to add a little context of Momoshiki's every last drop of chakra. Kakatua says all, so it isn't really a translation difference, but more like a tone difference thing. I just want to say the phrase kuraitsukusu is like consuming it until there's nothing left, completely exhausting it, draining it all. So yes, he does intend to suck up all the chakra on Naruto's planet, and Sasuke can tell with his Rinnegan that it's leaking out of the space that he constructed, which I'll also explain the nuances of in a second, which is why he's threatening all of mankind right now, as well as all of mankind that lives on Naruto's planet, and not just Naruto and Sasuke. Kakatua's translation for this part was, "He was truly an ogre. Those who would eat the soul of someone who'd been like a father couldn't be anything other than an ogre. That was their law." And then my translation for this part was, "Now his form was unmistakably that of an Oni. Having devoured the soul of his father figure, he had no choice but to become such a being. That was the fate of their kind." This is the big one here where the nuance itself completely shifts, and you might not think that at first glance, but as I explain, you'll probably understand a little bit better. First, I have to point out that I don't usually separate my lines as often as they're separated in Japanese, like Kakutua does. Even though that's the way it is in Japanese, it makes for a choppier read in English and sometimes over-dramatizes things because line separation is often used as a literary device for dramatic effect. But it's totally valid and fine to do and makes it easier to follow along with both the Japanese and the English at the same time. I just chunk sentences by topic for flow unless it was intentionally separated for further dramatic effect, which is something that English novels often do, which is what I would have done if I felt like the passage deserved it, but I didn't feel like this one did. Again, it's just a personal preference thing. I also just want to point it out that I left it as Oni in Japanese because that's indeed a word that you can look up in English and get the correct nuance of, rather than changing it to ogre. I feel like that's a localization choice, like changing onigiri to donuts in Pokemon, that causes more harm than good since it's a cultural thing that can easily be researched in English, while ogre changes the nuance of the creature itself. The nuance part comes in with this whole morality thing going on in Kakutu's translation versus me making up more about the way Otsutsuki operate, which is what's in Japanese. I'll give you the sentence so you can see for yourself or do further research if you want. So here the sentence is, まさにそれは鬼の姿だった。父たる者の魂を食らった以上、鬼であるしかなかった。それが彼らの定めだった。The first sentence I'm going to talk about is the one to do with the father figure thing. In the Otsutsuki lore, they come to planets in pairs. One of them is the sacrifice, the parent, while the other one is kind of like nobility that reaps the benefits and reports back to the higher-ups. Buso, Momoshiki, and Kaguya. According to the end of Light Novel 3, there are clans within the Otsutsuki. Kaguya is part of the Kyotsume clan. She was supposed to report to Momoshiki's clan after draining the chakra on Naruto's planet, but the report never came. That is why he went to go visit and figure out what was going on. But as you know, everything from the Academy novels will not necessarily be incorporated into the manga. I'm just giving further context from what I know that exists. Because, the Academy novels were written by Kodachi. While the art was drawn by Ikemoto, this movie novel was served as like the basis for what made Boruto, because again it was Kishimoto's original script for the first thing that made Boruto, and Ikemoto further elaborated on almost every single idea he included in this light novel. Whereas the Academy novels, some things have been largely ignored, like Nue and Jogan and all that kind of stuff. So they're a little bit separate in terms of the weight they hold for Ikemoto, I believe. From this novel, we know that the one who is the sacrifice is referred to as being in a parent role. This is interesting because in Japanese culture, it is often the older generation who sacrifice to make way for the young. Hence the parent role, sacrificing themselves for the other one. Momoshiki is often described as a younger and more beautiful Oni, while Kinshiki is described as a giant or brute. And Momoshiki's long flowing hair also kind of represents nobility, as I mentioned earlier, while Kinshiki's more represents what looks like an actual Oni. But in this instance, it doesn't just say parent, it says father. Why is that significant? Because this whole book is heavily about family dynamics and father-son and father-daughter relationships. But I'll get to that in the family dynamic analysis of this novel, which is hopefully coming eventually. I haven't started it yet because I was working on this, but anyway. For comparison one more time before I fully break this down, let's look at the lines side by side again so I have an easier time explaining things to you. Oh, I didn't make it so you could read this, but that's okay. 父たる者の魂を食らった以上、鬼であるしかなかった。Also, you can notice how the kanji for oni is kind of included in the kanji for soul, or tamashi is the radical, like this is radical on the side, but it's just an interesting thing. Anyway, that has ties, which I didn't explain in this, but maybe I'll get to that in another video about oni. Maybe I'll make something. I don't know. Kakutua, those who could eat the soul of someone who'd been like a father couldn't be anything other than ogre, and my translation was, having devoured the soul of his father figure, he had no choice but to become such a being. So, let's break it down first so I can show you exactly where Kakutua's translation shifts the intended meaning in Japanese, even though I do like their interpretation better and wish that was what it actually said, but that isn't, unfortunately. So, chichitaru this is quite formal phrasing for one who is in the position of a father figure. It's not exactly one who is a father or one who'd been like a father, but rather someone who is a father figure. So that someone who is like a father, emotionally nuanced, doesn't really apply. It's more about describing Kinshiki as one who is in the role of the father figure in the relationship of the Otsutsuki pair. So that's why, like, the whole been like a father had to be changed to the role of his father figure, or the soul, the soul of his father figure, I guess he ate. And the nuance of devouring the soul of someone is the same, so there's no need to explain that because Tamashi is just soul. But again, I explained a little bit more about Tamashi in the Boruto and Sarada analysis that I did, because it talks about Boruto comparing his Tamashi as soul to Sarada's. I think that's quote 17 if I remember correctly, for anyone that wants to look at that. But this Ijo here is also doing something that makes the nuance of Kakuto's translation slightly off as well. Ijo is like, since this happened, therefore. So having devoured, he had no choice to, which is the nuance of that latter part. So it fits the structure. Well, those who would do this thing makes it more removed and about teaching some moral principle, which the Japanese isn't really doing. It's just stating this happened, therefore this is the result, instead of those who do this end up like this. It's more of because he did this, this happened. This will make more sense once we get to explaining the latter half of the sentence, because the therefore part comes next. So this whole those who would eat the soul of someone couldn't be anything other doesn't really apply so much, because this is more generalizing it, and it's not supposed to be that generalized. It's supposed to be talking about the specific instance of Momoshiki eating the soul of his father figure. Oni de yaru shika nakatta. So very literally, this is had no choice but to be an Oni. This is the result part. So because he ate his father figure or devoured his father figure, he became an Oni. Oni de aru is literally to be an Oni or to exist as an Oni. And then shikanakatta is like there was nothing for him to be other than this. It was inevitable. And then finally, while the subject isn't stated in Japanese, do I have to explain this? I think it's pretty much the same. Couldn't be anything other than an ogre, had no choice but to become such a being. Had no choice is like this shikanakatta is more, it's more about like there was nothing he could be other than an Oni at this point after doing that thing. But it has more. What? Did I not explain that? I swear I did when I talked more about Oni. I went on an Oni rant. Okay, there's the Oni rant. So we'll get more into that later. And then finally, where the subject isn't usually stated in Japanese, this is directly inferred to be talking about Momoshiki and the way Otsutsuki clan works, not talking about people in general. So to tie that part all together, it's not saying people who do X are Y, it's saying because he did X, he was inevitably forced into becoming Y. It's more about the irreversibility of consequence than a moral principle. Hopefully that makes sense. For this last line here, それが彼らの定めだった. Kakuto's line was, that was their law. My line was, that was the fate of their kind. It ties, again, with what they're talking about the way the Otsutsuki clan operates and not a moral principle. So Kakuto's translation uses the word law, but the Japanese there is sadame. For another context of where this word is used, JoJo fans should be screaming the theme song right about now, which I'm not going to scream, but I'm going to do it anyway. No, I'm not. That's embarrassing. Okay. I can play that on piano, by the way. I like that opening theme, the first opening of JoJo. I can also play oh my gosh, is it Giorno's theme? Dun, dun, da, 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 da. That's the normal theme, but the part where it gets all slow and then does the piano part. But yeah, I can play that whole piano part. I also transcribed it by ear because none of the versions on the internet at the time were right. So if you want the actual version, I have it. Although I think I just wrote it down on a notebook somewhere and didn't actually write it out in terms of notes. But that's not important. Anyway, sadame. So you can see it has rules and laws here, but in this specific context, it's more about something, things that were previously decided on. Arrangements, decisions, rules, destiny, fate, something that's preordained. So it's not talking about moral principles or moral law, but the pre-made arrangements of the Otsutsuki as a clan. You devour the father or parental figure, you become an Oni. Cause, effect. This is the way their clan works. Again, while I do wish it was trying to throw some moral logic at you about how devouring your father makes you a demon, which kind of applies, but anyway, that's not really what the sentence is talking about. It's talking about a mechanism of their clan. Now I'm going to go on a side rant about Oni. Yay! I did a little side rant about Oni because they're important, so once again you get to see this lovely Wikipedia page. There's more than this, and it's probably translated better this time. Yay! Wee! Okay. Let's just go here. Oni are beings that traditionally represent former humans who lost their humanity, especially in no plays, which is a traditional, no and kabuki are like traditional kind of Japanese plays. But anyway, due to greed, jealousy, vengeance, and etc. Oni can also be perceived as ethnic gods, and this was more in the Heian period, which is the period that Momoshiki's speech most closely resembles. And to further elaborate, Takashi Okabe, a lecturer at Daito Bunka University, talks about Oni as being from another world that invade our world and cause instability. Demons that appear in tales from the Heian period again are often terrifying monsters that eat people, usually women. Hence that you ate your father, therefore you are an Oni. That doesn't necessarily make you an Oni, since you already were one, but now instead of being this kind of beautiful figure of robed royalty that's described as an Oni, Momoshiki takes on the actual characteristics of a traditional Oni. Red skin, crazy wild hair, eating people, greedy for chakra. So Momoshiki and Kinshiki, or the Otsutsuki in general, being described as Oni, does have a lot of important cultural ties that also tie into the way their clan works, which further explains why it's not just saying anyone who eats their father is morally corrupt and becomes an Oni, but rather this is the way Otsutsuki clan operates as Oni. Here are their cultural ties becoming clear. There you go. There's that. 鬼を超えたアキラ説、もはや人ならざる傲慢と化したモモシキは、周囲のチャクラを吸い上げ始めた。Kakato's translation was, Momoshiki, who had passed from being an ogre into a comrade-eating fiend and transformed into an inhumane demon, began to suck out the chakra from his surroundings. My translation was, Momoshiki had surpassed an Oni and became a Rakshasa, something inhuman, fundamentally corrupted beyond redemption. A demon of karmic corruption. He began drawing in the surrounding chakra. The formatting with the different paragraphs is again just me reclumping things for the sake of organizing by topic in Japanese, which is something, or in English I guess I should have said, which is something a lot of other professional translators do, and I often compare professional translators' works. Some of the ones I've compared are My Hero Academia School Briefs, or Sword Art, or The Devil's Part-Timer, or Excel World, which is some of my favorites. I also have Kusuriya, but, or The Apothecary Diaries. But I don't have the official English light novel translation for that. I don't know if there is one actually, but I have read the fan translations and compared them a little, just because that translator had translator's notes and I thought their translations were pretty good. But I like comparing and picking up on different techniques from various people, so that's just some of the stuff that I've looked at. I'd say the best is definitely this guy who did Sword Art. That was incredible. I just rearranged it for the sake of flow and grouping topics, but changed none of the nuance. So anyway, now to get more into Japanese mythology stuff. Akira Setsu, which I am going to copy and paste the link into here, is usually translated as Rakshasa, which this is a different thing, but you can look at the Japanese thing here because it exists. Wow! And it's a monster that harms people in a way such as eating them. But you can see it's mostly talking about the Buddhism one, not the Hinduism or the other things. So if you want to look at this page, scroll down to where you get to Buddhism, and then you can take this, or you can just look at this page too, because this is a pretty good page on what's going on here. It's a monster that harms people in ways such as eating them. This is also for kanji compound or a yojizukugo. So the first half is evil spirit and the second half is Rakshasa or Rasutsu in Japanese, but it just means a monster that causes harm and usually one that eats people. So this is the first half of the word and this is the second half of the word. So it's not just the Oni, he's an evil man-eating demon, and it's not just comparing it to him, he surpassed what it meant to be an Oni and became the nuance of Oni o koeta. I left it as Rakshasa since I left Oni as Oni for you to be able to do more digging on what each one means culturally instead of dumbing down the nuance for you, because I do think mythical creatures are very much surrounded in the lore of their culture, and that's important to understanding the story. Although, upon further understanding, this is pretty short. And this doesn't look like it even means the same thing, so I need to change that maybe. This is completely different. I think I just looked at this, maybe. Race of malevolent beings. They reside on Earth but possess supernatural powers, which they use for, usually used for evil acts such as disrupting sacrifices or eating humans. So, they usually use for evil acts is right, eating humans is right, power seeking is right, but I don't know about anything else, so maybe just use this article. It's a monster that causes harm. Maybe I should have just translated to Akira Setsu. I don't know if you... Let me check real quick if you... Akira Setsu? If you look that up, does anything come up? Yeah, it does. Okay. Nihongo Master. Wow. That's not helpful. That's also not helpful. This is all just a bunch of... So you wouldn't be able to find it. Is this a Vocaloid song? Anyway, okay. Well, you can't really look it up, so just use this article, I guess, and don't use this other one, even though I linked it. So maybe I need to change this, but the part where I had to add extra nuance for it to make sense was this word goma. So we're gonna copy this link, put it in here. Oh, that's right. Here you go. This isn't something you can find articles on when searching in English, and it's honestly a little difficult to explain, but basically it's a malevolent spirit, but in Buddhist terminology, the phrase is a metaphor for how bad deeds or karma act like demons, hindering one from the right path and causing them to lose their wisdom. And the one that causes evil can also be a goma. So basically this is talking about how Momoshiki, who once appeared to be slightly human, has now evolved into something that is incredibly far from human, and much more like an Oni, something beyond redemption, in the sense that regular Oni are existences that can sometimes be redeemed. Hence why I don't translate it in a regular context to demon, and also in the sense that Naruto knows full well his talk no jutsu isn't going to work, and this being of pure evil that they shouldn't feel bad about destroying because it's no longer something that even resembles a human, and it's no longer redeemable. Which is where I threw all the nuance back in with my translation, because that's kind of what the word is trying to imply. Not just the fact that he's gotten more demon-like, but it's definitely okay to kill him now because he's just straight up a bad guy. You also asked about the drawing in of chakra and most of the other important lines below, so I'm just going to jump into that section now. This was just me explaining the differences between my translation. Wow, okay. But briefly, I'd like to include, I usually include this ... barrier separation in my translation, so you can chunk if you're following along with the Japanese novel, so you can chunk the parts that way. Because it also sometimes provides shift in perspective or scenes, but there's a lot of these, it's usually separated, all the scenes and stuff are separated by this ... in Japanese. And it goes up and down, it's like 3 asterisks that are pretty big. I would show you the picture of that if I could, but I do not think I have a picture of that on hand, I apologize. So, should the term star be planet? Once again, I changed it to planet, despite describing why it was left as star in Japanese, just because I see no benefit to the English translation of leaving it as star. It only serves to cause more confusion to people like yourselves who want to analyze the English for nuance and get confused because the translation is too literal. Searching the difference between planet and star in English would not yield the same results as when you do it in Japanese, so since the nuance can't exactly be conveyed without much explanation, I left it as planet simply so the correct image will be conveyed, since the word planet in English is still not necessarily referencing the Earth, Moon, or Sun, which is the major nuance that you don't want to miss out on in Japanese. And if you think about it as a star, it seems too outer spacey. I explained the nuances above, so I'm not going to re-explain them here, but I really wish I could figure out how to link certain parts of my article in my blog for easier access. Either way, once again, it should technically be star, but it makes more sense to the English reader and conveys more of the correct image when it's translated as planet. Is the use of Seedplot consistent with the previous usage? It is, and I added more context to the translation here. The word seedplot, while it is a word that exists in the English language, isn't very common. Searching in English doesn't yield the same image results as it does in Japanese, as I explained earlier. It's a lot easier to describe what is happening through imagery with words like this than it is to pick a one-size-fits-all single-word translation. That's why I elongated it to a garden, seedlings for the Otsutsuki to reap, since seedlings fits that kind of separated saplings and soil nuance, and garden fits the seed nursery for cultivating those saplings in terms of the nuance as it is in Japanese. When Momoshiki is sucking the chakra from his surroundings, what exactly is happening here? Is this just emphasizing how much chakra he received from Kinshiki, or is he actually absorbing the chakra from the shinobi present, or from nature? Example, the natural energy of the planet, or a nearby star. This phrase in particular is very confusing, and I agree it was confusing in the other translation, but hopefully mine cleared that up a little bit more. Chakra has become life, embedded into many things. Momoshiki is sucking up all the chakra from everything in which chakra exists. All chakra on the planet. Naruto's planet, because the two places or spaces are separate but connected. The sentence there in Japanese is Shui no chakra o suiagete hajimeta. To literally break it down, Shui is surroundings, chakra is chakra, suiage is sucking up or sucking in, hajimete ita is starting to. I guess I didn't include that E because, so to explain really quick, in spoken Japanese, this E isn't usually included, so it's like hajimeru, hajimeteru, hajimeteta. But in written Japanese, it's hajimete ita, which is why sometimes you probably might hear me disclude this, but anyway. It's in the next sentence where you get the context that he's sucking up the chakra from beyond where Naruto and the gang currently are, which would be from Naruto's planet. So it's leaking out into Naruto's planet, the absorption. For beyond the parallel dimension he made. Should we interpret this as Momoshiki having created the current planet dimension and universe the characters are located at? No, not really. The word there is constructed, or kochikushita. And I'm going to pull this up for you as well. And I used the fancy dictionary for this one, so you can see the whole thing. The meaning of the word construct, because I know you guys were going to be very... Oh, what's the English word for that? こだわりが多いっていうのは、なんだろう。picky? Or not necessarily picky, but like wanting to know the details. An attitude to being overly concerned with something or pursuing it thoroughly without compromise. That's what it is. Attention to detail. Okay. 構築した. Here. There's a difference. Created, 作る, with this specific kanji, because there's multiple kanji for 作る, but this is like 作るas in like creating from scratch. Is basically making something from nothing. That's the nuance of this, again, specific kanji for 作る. Constructed, 構築, is making something from previously existing materials. Assembling, building. I even linked a longer explanatory dictionary as opposed to the usual one I've been linking, but if you want that one, I'll link it here too, so you can see. Dun-dun-dun. Here you go, constructing, the action of assembling and building. But if you have こだわりが多いだとしたら、これを使ってください。はい。If so, should we interpret this as an act of Momoshiki constructing, building, or spawning the space? See, he already knew the word. He already knew the nuance. Or the space, or would it be more appropriate to say he's referring to the fact that he made the dimension into his seed plot? I believe he and Kaguya use similar terms into making a garden out of earth or other planets by planting Shinju seeds. But Naruto's planet is the only seed plot. Momoshiki's space, or place, is something separate he constructed to separate Naruto from his planet temporarily, but again, it's still connected in that his chakra absorption is drawing from the chakra of Naruto's planet, from outside his little space thing that he made. Or like boundary, whatever, ikai. What is the other phrase for parallel dimension, and how does it compare to the ones used at the start of the chapter? Now here is where you can get into the arguments. The phrase used for parallel dimension in Kakutu's translation is now different from any previously used word, and that's because it now contains the kanji for yo, or world. It is the word isekai. Now it's become isekai. Despite that, I still don't believe it functions like an actual world in the isekai genre sense because of the previous context. Strictly speaking, an isekai, while it can be a fully separate world, it can also just refer to a place that is different from reality, as seen from the dictionary entry I linked. In other words, isekai is an umbrella term that can encompass ikai, but ikai cannot encompass isekai because it's more specific than isekai. It's the same with how a square fits into the definition of a rectangle, a shape with 4 straight sides, but a rectangle does not fit into the definition of a square, a shape with 4 straight equal sides. The lesser term, ikai, is more specific than the umbrella term, isekai, and ikai came first in the novel to describe what was going on, and all of Naruto's things that he was describing as what this place was very much gave off not full world vibes. So I'm not entirely sure why Kishimoto chose to change the word to isekai specifically here, since Momoshiki pulling chakra from Naruto's planet implies that the two spaces are spatially connected somehow, and definitely not completely different quote-unquote worlds in that sense. Even if it has terrain and all that kind of stuff, and it seems infinite, yeah, as I explained, if you know the difference between barriers and all this Shintoism kind of ideology and stuff, it's not necessarily that he created a planet. They've been fighting in this area long enough to know that it's bigger than just a small little space. It has terrain, but I don't think anyone else is living there, so it's not like a world or a separate universe in that sense of the word. From my perspective, the Otsutsuki can create the places like Kamui and Daikokuten and Gamahiro at will, and manipulate the objects and scenery inside them, but this absorption is sucking from outside the space that he constructed. As a side note, Shibai is the Otsutsuki who likely created that ability, that Shinjutsu, while the other Otsutsuki just construct temporary places or spaces with the powers that they've been given, which would be the Shinjutsu. So making places like that is likely another form of Shinjutsu as far as Boruto's lore is concerned, which fits with all the other stuff going on right now. And if you want to argue that, feel free. I'm probably not going to respond to any comments on this video because their comment power scaling people scare me. But again, if you want to talk more about this stuff, please head over to JonTheMaven's page because I know he's going to use this in some other things that hopefully I can link in the description as well. But because they have more advanced control, they can likely alter the terrain as well as who they bring in and out. But Sasuke with Rinnegan and Time-Space Ninjutsu has the ability to sense those spaces, and travel in and out of them. But yeah, that's what it is, and that's how it compares. What is intended by beyond? Is Momoshiki somehow pulling chakra into this dimension from Earth, the main Naruto dimension? Where is the chakra coming from? Beyond is indeed Momoshiki pulling chakra from Naruto's planet that is still connected to Momoshiki's place. The line there in Japanese is, それは彼の構築した異世界の外にまで漏出しつつある。Sorry, 漏出し, that's a mouthful to say. 漏出しつつある. To break it down literally, it's それは that is 彼の his 構築した constructed 異世界 other world の外に from outside まで even into 漏出し leakage つつある continue to. I know that made no sense, but essentially, Momoshiki's absorption of the chakra leaked beyond the space Momoshiki constructed and into Naruto's planet to absorb the chakra. So to bring back the Mario 64 analogy, it would be like someone inside the picture frame levels sucking in coins from the surrounding garden or the hallway or the bricks or the paint, the floor tiles, whatever what you want to use, something from that castle into the painting, even though people and things usually inside that picture frame wouldn't usually be able to interact with whatever is outside of it, and it's specifically made that way because Momoshiki made like the picture frame level whatever. He can do that. I don't know why this is a comment, not a period. Sorry. Momoshiki is like a sub-admin of his own level that has more privileges within the game, but isn't the creator. The Otsutsuki were basically given mod privileges by Shibai, if you want to think of it that way. So Momoshiki, as the constructor of the space, can connect to the outside world by making spatial holes in his space if he so desires, is kind of how I think of it. Is stream accurate? Is there any insight into where the stream is coming from or going to? Stream is fine, but it's also more like flow. The word there is nagare. Think of Boruto. I guess I'll link this. Think of Boruto. English for you. There you go. Think of Boruto seeing the trail of chakra that connected to Nue during the ghost incidents at the beginning of the Boruto anime, or the Academy novels, but I know those aren't really they're kind of translated by fans, but Sasuke is seeing the flow of chakra that is being absorbed. It's coming from Naruto's world outside of Momoshiki's constructed place. Because he has time-space ninjutsu powers and the Rinnegan that's likely a Shinjutsu level dojutsu that can see through Otsutsuki's stuff, he can see that flow as well, knowing where Naruto's was and how to get there. For mankind who lived on this star, is this referring to Naruto and Ko surviving the fight in general, or perhaps humanity itself surviving the Otsutsuki? This part is referring to humanity surviving the chakra absorption Momoshiki is currently enacting. Because that absorption is drawing from Naruto's planet, despite the constructed space they are currently living in, the people of Naruto's planet chakra will be drained as well. If they don't end this fight soon, humanity itself and all of Naruto's planet will have its chakra drained. And they will all die. And that is why Naruto is like, oh, this is bad. Sasuke is also like, oh, this is very bad. That was the end of the questions. Yay! I hope this insight was helpful. I was thanking the person who gave me this because I sent it directly to him and then I did not edit this before I started reading it, but that's fine. Thank JonTheMaven very much for being so specific with what he was requesting and giving me context into his question so I can answer it in hopefully a satisfactory way and knew what to look for and elaborate on instead of just giving me a page and being like, translate this. I don't like when people do that because I have no context, I have no idea what you're looking for, and I don't know what you're going to be kodawari-ing over. I don't know where did that go? Yes, this word. Kodawari. An attitude of being overly concerned with something or pursuing it thoroughly without compromise. If I know what you want, then it makes it so much easier to provide the detail for you. So give me context. I need context. You can't just say, translate this word for me, or I will have no idea what specifically context you want me to translate in, because all words need context to be translated. Anyway, and you might think, not all words need context to be translated. That's ridiculous. You can just say oishi means delicious. No, if you've heard me ramble about oishi can also mean like, what a good job. Like, what a job with great benefits. So you can't just pick one word and say that applies in all circumstances. No, it does not. I need to know what circumstance it is to know what words to pick. And I'm not just going to give you all of them because that takes for, I mean, not that it takes forever, but it's so much more work than if you had just told me what you were looking for, and then I can provide you more detail about what you're looking for. But anyway, this was a very, very well thought out request, and I was actually paid enough time to put 25 hours of this. Like, I spent time because I was paid well for this, and I really appreciate that I wasn't just given $1 and told to do a full thing. If you want to donate or ask me questions, feel free. You can click on my blog post, and at the top, the Ask Me Questions section has a link to my Ko-Fi where you can ask me stuff. I also think that the requests for retranslations in places, I really appreciate like the provided translation, to know especially what your preconceived knowledge is. So if you have something that you want to say, hey, I saw this translation and I want to know how it's different. I love doing that kind of stuff because it's so much easier to know exactly where things are going wrong and where the nuance is like being twisted or misinterpreted by everybody else in comparison to how it is, so that I know what words not to use and what words to use to convey that idea by direct comparison. It helps provide a clearer picture, I think, than if I were to just give an explanation on my own. And that's another one of the reasons why I really like doing the translation comparisons when Viz releases their official translation of Boruto chapters, because it makes it easier for me not to have to go through every single like word when I do my translation and explain all of my specific decisions, but rather explain the ones that are different, because that just again makes it easier, because then the things that are the same are like, yes, this is a good translation, and then the things that are different are like, okay, well, here's where it was different and here's why, whether it was me being different or me being different from the Japanese, or me taking a different interpretation, or Viz taking a different interpretation. It's just a lot easier to understand what needs to be talked about that way. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope anyone else who looks at this video enjoys this video. There's going to be several probably long videos for this novel, because there's just a lot to talk about with it, as there always is whenever Kishimoto writes something. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day, or night, or whatever you're doing. I am sorry for making you sit through, I mean, not making you, but thank you for sitting through this whole thing if you watched this whole thing. Yeah, that's it. Bye. Have a nice day.